Jambo, Jambo, everybody, Jambo Karibu. Welcome to Jambo Dr. Akumbu. I am your host, Rip the Tamomo Akumbu. My guest today is Dean Chalak Richards. She is such a wonderful guest, and I look forward to having more sessions with her. So for this episode, we are going to talk about legalities in DEIB, but we will be focusing on the societal and institutional impact. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and we look forward to many more. Now, let's welcome Dean Richards. Jambo, Dean Richards.
Jambo, Dr. Akumbu.
Oh, love the hairstyle.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I am feeling it. You're already in your spring look. I am feeling the spring look.
I am trying.
I was asking my sister the other day, I was like, hey, do you have time to do my hair? And she never responded. And I'm like, oh, Lord Jesus, help me.
Absolutely. I've had that myself.
Right. I am itching for it. I'm itching for a change. I need the spring look. The sun is out. And
the sun's out. I need my hair off my face, and I need to just be able.
Yes, that's how I feel. I think I felt like I was going to thread it. Have you ever done threading? Like I'm just going to get some thread and just thread it and do like one of those old African styles with the basket. Yeah, I'm feeling adventurous. So, all right, yes, welcome again. Welcome to Jambo Dr. Akumbu, and today's podcast, as we promised, we were going to come back and we were going to dig deeper, and not on our personal and individual levels, but we were going to move a little bit further and handle the institutions and the business. As you're aware of the struggles, and sometimes the media really helps us know what's happening across the country. This week, as we know, or even yesterday or 2 days ago, there was that struggle in the Tennessee House with the students calling for reform, and the two now former lawmakers expelled from the House. The third one basically stayed because she had one vote extra that kept her in. And it is not lost to me that the two people that got expelled are two Black men, and the one woman that slid through was a white lady. And I honor her persistence, and I honor the fact that she stood up for justice and she made her voice heard. And I also want to just honor these men for standing for what they believe in, and for holding strong to their values and what they think it's right, to the point that they lost something to it. I have often asked people, what have you given up for what you believe in? And I don't know, like, you've heard of the story, and they both call Justin. So I think one is Justin Pearson and the other one is Justin Jones. I just want to get your reflection, since we're going to be talking about institutions and how DEIB is important in institutions and in the society in general, knowing that our political establishments are a big part of our social life and how we reform society and all of that. Do you have any thoughts on what is going on there, and just any reflections on that?
Absolutely. And, I apologize for looking down. I'm actually trying to find something, because something you said just reminded me of a trip that we recently took at the School of Law. We lead a group of students on a Justice and Faith spring break trip.
Okay.
We go to, and I promise this is related to your listeners who heard me before. They know that sometimes I can go on a tangent, but this is related, I promise. We led a Justice and Faith spring break trip to Montgomery, Alabama, where we spend maybe 72 hours in the city. We visit the National Museum for Race and Justice, Peace and Justice, I believe it is, and the memorial, both founded by Bryant Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative. And then one of our professors leads a walking tour of Montgomery, Alabama. And it's an amazing time where we wrestle with the history, the real history that's undeniable in this country, of racial injustice and lynching and pain. And this last trip, we ended at the Greyhound station where Martin Luther King Jr., Senator John Lewis, John Lewis, and many others who were part of that Montgomery bus boycott were arrested. And on the side of that Greyhound station, which is now itself a museum, it's painted on there, "What are you willing to get off the bus for?" And that is a resounding question to me. I was looking because I took a picture of it and I wanted to quote it properly. Right. And it stayed with me. And it's something that I think goes exactly to what you were saying, Dr. Akumbu, that, rightly or wrongly, how you may feel about leading a protest inside the House and whether that's appropriate. And of course, there can be debates around that. Exactly what you just said was that for these two lawmakers and all of the students and other young people who joined them, gun control is an issue that they are willing to lay themselves down for. And that's what that question is, whether it's going across the Selma Bridge and saying, what, like John Lewis, are you willing to lay yourself down for, to be almost killed for, to be politically excoriated for? And I know this conversation is not as related to faith as we were then, but I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that it's Good Friday.
Yes.
And if I didn't point out, and this may be controversial to some, that Jesus was killed by both the political and the religious establishment. And so I'm not at all saying that Representatives Jones and Pearson are Jesus. I'm not saying that. Not at all. What I am saying, though, is that we can see in all of those things that sometimes we're called to lay ourselves down for larger issues. And I think that's what we see here. Like you, I find it at least interesting, at least worthy of the question, that the two lawmakers, both under 30, both young Black men, one of whom I believe Representative Jones has some roots in a large Black church in Nashville, but I could be wrong. But those are the ones who were expelled along party lines. Right. And I find that very interesting. Now, I will commend Representative Johnson, the white female representative who was not expelled, for standing boldly alongside them and calling that into question and saying that while she does not want to lose her seat, she wonders why she is the one who still has it. And I call that out to say that, we're talking about moving to the institutional and societal level. Change at societal, structural levels requires all people to come together. It cannot just be these young Black men who are laying themselves on the line. It has to be all people calling together and saying, there may be injustice here, and now what can we do to rectify that? There may be a problem. What can we do about that? Particularly when it's an issue that for that generation, people under 30, they grew up, regardless again of how you feel about gun control, they are the generation of mass shootings. Yes. They are the generation that grew up doing active shooter drills. Yes. They are the generation that goes to concerts and has to think about exit spaces. It is ingrained in them now. And so perhaps for that generation, like other generations have had different callings, theirs is the generation that is called to end that type of violence. I don't want to get into, again, the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms and all of that. I'm not getting into that, but I am saying, blessed are the peacemakers. And so perhaps they are a generation agitating for peace so that they might be thinking about when they have children. Right. Do they want their children being raised in the same environment they are? And those are structural things that they're advocating to change, and structural things that we should be taking seriously as well.
Right. And that brings to mind, when we raise our kids, why do we raise our kids? We're raising our kids so that when we're not here, they're able to survive. We're doing everything to create an environment for them to be able to survive, to be able to grow and thrive. So it is with pride when we see these young generations stepping up and doing the things that they believe are the things that will preserve their generations, is the thing that will preserve their lives. So, like you said, they're probably thinking about their kids. The same way we fought to give the best for our kids, the same way they're thinking about their kids. They're in their
and if I can note, I mentioned Montgomery bus boycott in the 60s. can we just take a moment and remember that all of the people that we remember from then, and we think they're all these august figures, were themselves all under 30. Well, not all, the majority were under 30.
Majority.
They were, to me, children. I think about it now, like, you're 24 years old leading a movement.
Yes.
They were babies, right? And so let's not become too, sometimes we can be older. I try not to think about it again, the power of Fenty and MAC
Yes.
and makeup. But we can be a little condescending, like, oh, those kids, no, they can be the catalyst, and they very well are, perhaps right now, the catalyst for something that we see, because, they are the ones, again, who have been most intimately impacted by this in the past 10 to 15 years.
Right. Yes. They have the energy too.
Yes. I can't be out there like that anymore.
They have the energy I do not have. So, so yes,
Absolutely.
It's like, how can we guide them to actually just thrive in these things and build the world that is the world they want to live in?
Absolutely.
They're not doing it for us. They're doing it for themselves and for their children. We're living the like we're standing on our grandparents' shoulders. And we need to be the shoulders for them to stand up now and be where they need to be, instead of finding ways to shut them up. So thank you so much for reflecting on that. Yes, it's a great thing to be able to just dig a little bit, just touch on these things that are happening, current culture, current things in the society, and without actually even though we are not experts in the political arena, it's still good to be aware of what's happening in society and how it impacts us as Black people and people in general. So, talking about societal and institutional, bringing us back to DEIB in these areas, we really wanted to look at that and how the impact in businesses. And I know that the biggest thing that I've read critiques and I've heard people say that DEIB is something that we shouldn't try to sell to anybody. It is something that should just be. Like diversity, equity, inclusion, it should just be. It shouldn't be something where I have to sleep and try to wake up and convince somebody to do. And if I have to build a strategy just to convince you to do it, then it stops being real. It stops being something that we need to, it stops being what it really should be, because we have concluded on the show that it is a humanitarian thing to do. It is, as humans, it is the human thing to do. Like treating people fairly, treating people equally, treating people as human beings is just the right thing to do. So how do you approach it when you talk with your students and talk on this topic when they go out there and face a world that is saying, go away with this divisive ideas, go away with this work ideology, go away with all of this, we don't want to be a part of it? How do you get them to come to a place of comfort where they can present this to their companies and try to get buy-in without feeling like they're alienating a lot of people?
No, that's a fascinating and important question. And I will say that you made it a bit of a segue, but it still ties into what we were just talking about, right? Because what we're talking about with Tennessee and some of those broader issues are institutional and societal structures,
right?
Not the individual interpersonal interaction. And that's the same thing that we're discussing here. And so what you're raising is a tension that many people sit in, the tension between what we call the business case for diversity and the moral case for diversity. And for most people who want to think of themselves as good people, or, are especially people who are historically marginalized or excluded from environments, the idea that I have to give you a business case to prove my worth, to prove my humanity, to prove that I should be somewhere, rubs wrong. Because as you were saying, we are all fully human. We've accepted that as the baseline, that we're all worthy. So if I now have to show you the facts and the figures and draw charts about why it's important to have more people like me here, then people go, well, wait a second, am I not then inherently saying that I'm not as worthy as the other person? And my pushback on that is that, yes, for some people that can be true. There are some corporations or organizations, institutions where you're going in and you are truly saying to them, these people are worth being here and here's why. And that's not a fight that I believe in fighting, because then we're approaching from two different areas, right? You're asking me to prove to you that I'm a human being, and I'm not going to do that.
Right.
I exist already. Until you can agree at that baseline, there's nothing more for us to talk about. Right. So that's not what I'm talking about. But what I am talking about is what I would suspect many of your listeners would agree with, which is that successful institutions require strategy. Whether it's a for-profit business, a not-for-profit, nonprofit, whether it's an institution of higher education, whatever it is, you employ strategies. People create vision plans and strategic plans and work things out and make long-term decisions, and they wrestle through, how are we going to do this well? What they're doing is, before they even get started, they're thinking through, why is this important? What are the outcomes that we're going to measure? How are we going to know that we were successful? Who do we need to put on this? They gather their best and most brilliant minds from across the institution and say, we're creating a task force or a committee and a think tank, and we're going to determine how to do this in a way that's going to be successful, right? They do a market scope, all these things. Your listeners are more well-versed than I in what that looks like. My argument, though, to those corporations and so on, is that if you truly take issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging seriously, then the same effort and thoughtfulness that you'll put into deciding whether or not to open a second location or expand into another form of clothing, or should we diversify our menu, whatever it may be that you're in the business of, you will apply that same thoughtfulness, that same expertise to this area as well. And if you're not willing to devote the time, the energy, the resources to this, then what you're telling me is that you actually don't take it as seriously as you're saying you do. So then that shifts it, where it's no longer about proving that this should be happening. It's being strategic about what it looks like for us.
Right.
And how we are going to measure that we are a successful institution in this. Because for every institution, it should look differently. I hope that makes sense a little bit about sharing my position, and I'm happy to delve more into any of those things.
Right. And it brings me back to the from the last episode where you say, this is not about quarters. This is not about meeting quarters. This is about you really being strategic and saying, I see a need. How do I feel the need? Instead of saying, oh, let me just fill this quarter and let them get off my back. Right?
Exactly.
So it kind of brings us back to that filling the quarter. I really appreciate you saying that, because that is the argument that a lot of people would present. I'm not sure. If I told you the story, I was talking to somebody, an acquaintance, and I just met them, not really an acquaintance, I just met them, and we're having this conversation, and this he said, so what are you planning on doing? I'm saying, oh, I'm kind of in the DEIB space, but I'm saying out with culture and things like that. And he was like, so what does DEIB mean to you? And I break in and I go in and I just explained a little bit more, and I say it would be nice that if I go somewhere, just keeping it really basic, if I go somewhere, a business that serves, say, in the Crenshaw area, I don't want to be served by an all non-Black people. I want to see some people of color serving in there, for example. And it is my job as a leader to make sure that leadership understands that and be able to see that need to bring in more people that look like me, so that when I go in to do something, I don't feel like I'm a fish in water, out of water. So I kind of just broke it down, and they just got mad. If they gave me all their understanding. So when I said to them, like, I find it hard to believe that you do not, as a leader in the position, because he was well placed in their position, as a leader in this position, I find it hard to believe that you do not know what DEIB is, and you seem to want me to say something, seems like it's a trap You're trying to trap
Mhm.
me. And when I pushed back a little bit, they laid it all out, and they were very,
Mhm.
very aware, knowledgeable about it. But you can tell that commitment was not there. They don't believe in it. They know it. They don't believe in it.
Mhm.
So that really woke up something in me to remember that some people might know about DEIB, their institutions know about DEIB, their institutions even know about the importance of it, but deep down they choose not to want anything to do with it. And it's just like you said, if I have to prove to you that I'm human, then the conversation stops there. There's no need for this conversation. So that was like a really like wake up thing for me. And then just hearing more about people quitting their jobs because the companies bring them in just to fill that quota, and they don't really like know what to do, and they request things, resources to do the work, and they don't do it, and they don't get those resources. So those are those challenges. Those are those challenges. Do you, in your experience or theory even, have an idea of how we could really just move people forward, like based on all of these little things that we've talked about?
Yeah, this is what I work with my students on when we think about creating an action plan. But this also goes to what you're saying right now, right? And so to me, the first thing to do is for an institution or an organization to identify their priorities. Actually, that's step two. Let me go back. Step one is the conversation you were having with this leader, which is defining your terms.
Right.
Step one for any institution is for everyone to get on the same page about what we mean at this institution when we say diversity, when we say inclusion, when we say equity, when we say belonging, when we say justice, whatever it is, what do we all mean first? Because there are a lot of things floating out there and people bring baggage into it, right? And so the first thing for anyone to do is to level set. Here's what we mean when we say this, and here's what that means for us here. So for some places, say it's that business in Crenshaw and it's all Black, but maybe there's no age diversity.
Right.
Or maybe there's no geographic diversity. Maybe everyone is heterosexual, right? Like there are any number of ways that an institution can be homogenous. And so first it's recognizing, looking at your data and saying, what does diversity actually mean to us?
Right.
What does belonging actually mean to us? If we were a place where everybody belonged, what would that look like here?
Right.
Because what it looks like here is going to be different than what it looks like somewhere else. I tell students and businesses that I may consult with, it's like a family. Every family may have a basic structure of celebrating birthdays, right? Like we all have this idea of you've got a cake, you get some presents, maybe there's a party, right? But each family also has a different tradition of it. So to my family, it may look like the entire day off and everybody comes over and we spend all this time together, and it has to happen on your actual birthday.
Right.
To another family, it may mean we wait 3 months and we do this big thing. And to another family, it may just be, oh yeah, when you wake up in the morning, you get some text messages.
Yeah.
Right? You're defining it. For our family, this is what that looks like. The birthday is the birthday. Everyone has the same agreement on what a birthday is. But it's now for our family, what does it look like? For that family, what does it look like? For that family, what does it look like? To me, it's the same thing here. Okay, we've defined diversity. Diversity is simply a difference or variation in the members of a thing. Fine. Right. But for us, that may mean this. For you, that may mean something else. Inclusion is, and so on. And so the first step is to have the conversation that to me has to start at the leadership level, senior leadership level, of what does this mean here? Right. What are we willing to say this means here? And then developing a very clear, in business, they call it the elevator pitch, right? Like if someone asks you, what's this about? You can say it in the time it takes to get to your floor. You should also be able to have an elevator pitch on what your definition is and what it means for your institution. Right. So that you're not giving the I saw this on Twitter definition. You're giving, this is what it means here for us today. Right. And then from there, identify your priorities. So your need, your opportunity, your challenge, your new direction. And again, be able to say, for us, this is what diversity or inclusion or belonging means. And these are our one or two or three priorities on this, so that you can be clear to your internal staff as well as your external constituents to be able to say, if you come here, these are our priorities. Take it or leave it, right? Like, so someone else comes over to my family for my birthday, I can be very clear, this is what it means here. And if you don't like the way we do it, like, oh, well, it's not your family. Go ahead, have a birthday party over there, right? But this is how we do it over here.
Right.
And that makes it easier for institutions if they start by being very clear around how they define things and where their priorities are, then people get to make informed choices about where they want to be and how they want to be involved.
Yes.
And I think that's what becomes difficult, like with the leader that you're saying, there's a little bit of fear there. Well, if you're defining it differently than I'm defining it, if your priorities are different than my priorities, then what does that mean for the future of this?
Right.
And that's why it's start at leadership. You all need to agree at the high levels, this is what this means, so then everyone else can come into alignment and come into accord.
Right.
But staff morale becomes an issue when people issue sort of vague statements, like you're saying, like, oh, we have the head knowledge, this is what diversity means, and it's important to us to be an inclusive environment, great. And then staff are like, okay, and so you have one idea about what's going to happen, someone else has another idea, and 6 months later you're all sitting there going, they said that it was important, but nothing's happened and no one's doing anything. And well, that's because you didn't start first with clarity and identifying your priorities. Yeah.
And it almost feels like leadership, like us doing this podcast and saying this out loud, it's like we're giving leadership permission to find it. And that's why I like so much, I always revert to what Pepperdine is doing, because I feel like they are one of the institutions, especially a Christian institution or religious-based institution, that has figured out what that means for them. And pretty much everybody has found a home, because they come in when people start to push back. I've been in a class where I've heard pushback, and I've heard the teacher basically say, this is our home, this is how we do it in our home. If you don't agree with it, oh well, this is our home.
I basically said that last week. We had an admitted students day for students who were admitted to the School of Law, and they get to come and the open house and all of that.
Yeah.
And I spoke to them as Dean of Students, and so did our Dean of the school spoke before me. And we were able to be very clear. This is what our community is like. These are what our expectations are. We bring in speakers. You know, the example that our Dean gave is that before she passed, God rest her soul, we had Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a speaker at the law school. And we've had Justice Clarence Thomas. We showed her life documentary and we showed his life documentary. There are people across ideologies who will have issues with either one of those things.
Yes.
But as an institution, as a law school, we have committed to being a place where both of those documentaries can be shown and the space can be made for a real nuanced conversation on that. And so if you are going to have issue with us showing Justice Ginsburg's life documentary, or you are going to have issue with us showing Justice Thomas's life documentary, then maybe this isn't the institution for you.
Yeah.
But if you're going to say, I'm not really a fan of Justice Ginsburg's documentary, but I appreciate the fact that I should understand and engage in it, so I'm going to go to the viewing and engage in the panel conversation after, and ask my real nuanced conversations and wrestle with it in my thought and be able to be a more intelligent person discussing her ideologies. Well, we're not asking you to agree with her.
Right.
We're asking you to engage.
Yes.
And so if you're willing to do that with her and with Justice Thomas,
yes,
then this is the institution for you. If not, we said to those admitted students, we wish you the best.
Right.
Go somewhere where you're going to thrive.
Right.
It may not be here.
Right.
Right. And being able to say that very clearly
is liberating.
It helps. Yeah, it's liberating and it's liberating for them. They know what they're going to get. You're not coming in and going, I thought I was going out for sushi, and when I ordered the sushi, they brought me pasta.
Yes.
You know what you're getting when you place your order, you know?
I love that. I really, really love that, because I think in one conversation with the chief diversity officer for recruitment at another at a corporate institution outside of education, he said basically the same thing. Like, you have to really be sure of the company that you're going to work for. If you are, especially if you're a DEI person or DEIB person, you want to work for a company, be very sure how those people define it. If they bring you in to help define it, you still have to be very sure what your values are compared to what that particular company might require.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's liberating for the individual. It is liberating for the company, and it gives these companies that are afraid, or institutions. I always fall back to institution of religious institutions, because they struggle with that a lot. Like, I fall back to them and I say, you have the freedom to define this the way you think it works best for you. But there is nothing wrong with you defining this. And if you're a Christian institution, particularly, you need to really think about it, because you're serving people from a lot of different backgrounds.
Yeah.
You cannot think that just because you're a religious institution and that religion binds you, unites you, that there are no differences. Because even children from the same home have differences. So you cannot just say, oh no, Christ unites us. Yes, Christ unites us, but I'm still a Black woman and my hair is going to need work. So you might do your hair in 2 hours. I might be that student that needed the whole weekend to get my hair done. So are you aware of those little differences? It might be small, it might be an individual thing, but it is something that if a lot of us Black students just don't show up to events on Saturday, you have to be aware that we're not with our hair.
You know, and that brings us back to why I think creating the business case is so important.
Right.
And I told my students who were struggling with this idea in class that maybe instead of calling it a business case, which feels like proving it, you're creating the why.
The why.
Right? Why are we committed to this? Why is this something important to us? Why is this a part of our strategic vision? Why is this integrated into our company's ideology and culture? Like you're laying out why this matters to all of you, which hopefully, you know, for a for-profit institution has some financial payoff, or a not-for-profit, it has cultural payoff, whatever it may be, right? But laying out the why is important, because then when someone comes back and says, well, I don't agree with this, or you should be doing it this way, or whatever, you're able to point back to the why in it. Yes. Why have you committed to it? And then when it gets hard to do, because make no mistake, it's hard to do. It's hard for me to sit in the place and have the students who are very upset that we're showing the Justice Thomas documentary come to me, and me have to say, we're going to be showing it anyways.
Yeah.
I invite you to participate and to meaningfully raise your concerns in a way that promotes dialogue around the ideologies, maybe the judicial decisions you don't agree with. That's not attacking the person as a human being, but their ideas, right? Actually sit there and wrestle with that. That is a hard conversation to sit in. But because I have made up in my mind that the commitment to nuance and to gray areas and to being an institution where both of those things can be found is important for the institution, and at least for now aligns with my personal values, then I can endure the harder conversation.
Right.
But if I don't understand why this is the commitment, why that's the priority, why that's the definition, and what the expected payoff is, I'm not going to be able to endure the hard times in the same kind of way. The example I gave my students a couple of days ago is, you know, I'm engaged, we're getting married soon, and my fiance and I are doing premarital counseling. And why? Because we've agreed that premarital counseling is important for us to create a strong foundation for our relationship, get to know each other better. Yeah. But somehow throughout this counseling, it's come out that he doesn't believe I'm perfect. And I just understand.
Congratulations first. I mean,
Thank you. I'm like, I do things wrong. I'm not perfect. You're, and that's hard, right? Like, it's hard to be like, I love you so much. Also, what do you mean you don't agree with me?
yes.
That's hard. But because we both ahead of time, he didn't just say, okay, fine, we'll do the premarital counseling because you want to.
Right.
And I wasn't like, oh, okay, we'll do it because this pastor says we have to.
Right.
We agreed that irrespective of those things, for the two of us and for the foundation we want for our marriage, that it's important to sit and wrestle with those difficult things. So then when we're in the premarital counseling and we're having the hard thing, we're both going back to, but we agreed to do this because fighting through these harder things, like wrestling with it, is going to give us a better foundation for our marriage. Right? And so it's the same type of thing. You have to agree before you start it why you're doing it. That's all that business case is. That's all establishing those priorities and laying out those definitions. That's all that is. Why are we committed to this? You should be able to articulate that. So when it is a hard day and someone makes a mistake, or you end up in the news, or it's challenged, like whatever it is, you can go back to, we are committed to getting through this hard part because we know what it is that we're trying to ultimately achieve, Yeah. Sorry, too many personal examples there, but I hope.
No, but that's great. It's a great example. It is really a great example because we don't often realize that a beautiful relationship, a beautiful company, a beautiful interconnections with people comes from doing that inner work and doing all this other work and wrestling with those difficult things and having those dialogues and going through it. So we usually think, oh, it's beautiful over there, let's just do it like they do it over there. No, their marriage is so great, they hang out every weekend. Maybe if we hang out every weekend, our marriage will be great. No, you have to define it for yourself. You have to go through your own struggles by yourself in your company and then grow from there. To be completely transparent, one of the reasons why I could have just done this podcast and focused on entertainment and culture, and I would have been just fine. But I was wrestling with the field. When I was first introduced to the field and was told about the field and encouraged to enter the space, I was like, ooh, controversies. I was like, get me out of here, controversies. So I said to myself, as a Christian woman who is a leader, what would Jesus do? It sounds petty, but seriously,
but it's true.
Wrestle with it. I had to wrestle with it and say, these are the challenging conversations that will come up. I had to do a lot of internal work. Like every conversation took a layer. Like, you remember we talked about peeling off the layers?
Yeah.
Every conversation peeled off a layer. From my very first uncomfortable conversation by myself for like 5 minutes, it's a video, very uncomfortable video. 5 minutes, I just put my foot in the water on this. I was like, Lord, help me. This is going to be hard. And I believe that with every step, with dealing with those hard issues, talking to different people that deal with the hard issues, getting people that will just unfriend me because they didn't like where I was going with the idea, and thinking, okay, we don't really agree, instead of dialoguing and say, how can we find a compromise on the way we look at this thing, or even help me to understand their perspective. Why do you believe these things? Or even, why do you not like it? Like, I am curious to hear why you don't like DEIB, period. If you tell me, then maybe I could share something else with you that will resonate, or I might learn something from you. But just running away from me was the same thing I wanted to do when I was first introduced. I wanted to run. I was like, no, Christ wants me to bring peace, not confusion. So,
it says the kingdom of God suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. I'm not telling anyone to go fighting.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to cut you off, but
No,
I
you
had
go.
the same struggle,
Yes.
right? And to your listeners who are like, wait a second, I thought we were at the institutional level, not the individual level. It's the
Take.
same thing.
Yes.
It's the same thing. I had the same struggle. I didn't want to be, to be candid, I didn't want to be the Black woman who was the racism fixer, right? There's a trouble, go ask the Black woman. I
Yes.
didn't want to be that. I was
Yes.
like, I've got expertise in other things.
Mm-hmm.
I've practiced other things. This doesn't have to, why should this have to be my area?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that. And recognizing, and this goes for organizations as well that may step forward, especially religious institutions.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was also recognizing people are going to make assumptions about me.
Right.
People, before they meet me, see my picture and see my title and make assumptions about who I am, what my experiences are, what I believe, what I want to do, what I think they should be doing with their lives. They come in to everything with me in this loaded place,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I just wanted a venti chai tea latte. I wasn't even trying to do all that with you right now, right?
Yes.
At an institutional level, right? Like they'll be, Dean Richards is coming. She's going to tell us we have to change these 7 things about our class or our structure, or oh gosh, what's going to happen when we bring her into our organization?
Yes.
And I'm like, guys, the first thing I want to do is figure out where's the water,
Yeah.
where are the pens, right? Like,
What the bathrooms?
where are the bathrooms? Can I change my shoes?
Exactly.
That's all I want. And so it's a weighty thing, I think, for, as you were saying, to do that wrestling, for institutions to do that wrestling with,
Yes.
what does this mean for us? How do we define this? What are our priorities?
Yeah.
And that wrestling is necessary because once you put it out there,
Yeah.
people will make assumptions,
Right.
and people will have expectations.
Yes.
And if you're not prepared, that can also be a huge challenge to overcome.
Mm.
And there are organizations who are like, oh man, we didn't think when we said X that this is what was going to come from it. There are religious organizations and churches who put out beautiful statements the summer of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2-3 years later, their Black church members said, hey, did you realize that it's Juneteenth and we didn't say anything about it in church? And they're like, why would you think we would say that? And they're like, well, because you said a statement and you said that you cared about our cultural experience, right? Or can we play this type of music? Or man, we've never brought in this type of guest speaker, or whatever it may be. And the church is like, why did you have this expectation? Well, you said that this was important. I didn't say it was important to you. You said it was important to you.
Mm-hmm.
So why you don't say it's important to you if it's not.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's what people are, and even in so the for-profit business space, right? Like customers go, you said you cared about this, so now I expect this when I walk in. Going all the way back to what we were saying before, being clear gives you freedom.
Right.
It gives you, the institution, and your constituent freedom to make choices. And the Spirit of God brings freedom. And so there should be, and that Spirit is very clear about your boundaries, the expectations, what it looks like, what you should be doing. And then you have freedom to operate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we touched something that is really, really important here. Like this part like we said, it might look like it's in the individual level, but we are the leaders, right? We are the leaders, and they're leaders like us in those places, which we are basically saying this by saying, we give you permission to be able to wrestle. We give you permission to define it and redefine it and twig it and make that message really clear, and ask for input from the people that you're going to serve.
Yes.
Ask for input and see also how can you balance what you believe and what the needs are. That way you can better serve the people. Because as a leader, like there's some hills that you just don't need to die on. Like the things that you just have to be like, I give this one to you. Let's work it the way you want it to work. I really love that because, like you said the other day, am I trying to get them to think critically, or am I trying to just do things the way I think it should be done? So as a leader, like that flexibility and that freedom is not just for you to define, it's also when you come to implementation, knowing what am I implementing? Am I implementing to serve the people, or am I just implementing this plan because it's well written out?
Yeah. Well, and what something you said there that's so important, that good leadership involves, that I'm rephrasing, but
Yeah.
to
Yes.
me, I heard good leadership involves engagement and transparency.
Right.
And so being transparent about the wrestling process. Oh,
Hmm.
we are really committed to this, and we're trying to define what this means for us,
Hmm.
how we as an institution sit in this,
Hmm.
where our priorities should be. We invite you into this process. And there's still clarity. I'm the one making this decision, or, this board or whoever is making this decision at the end of the day, but we're inviting you into the wrestling process, and we're telling you that we're wrestling with it, so that when we ultimately say, this is how we define this is what our priorities are, how we got there. And that invites deeper trust. So even if you don't necessarily agree with us 100%, you trust where it came from because you understand the process that it came from, right? And so transparency and engagement in creating those priorities is necessary. And then that's what you're doing, is you're saying, these are our overarching priorities, these are our overarching values. Now go execute it however you feel.
Yeah.
As long as you remain in these priorities, do what you want.
Yeah.
Have fun, knock yourselves out. Flexibility is there as long as it links back
To that
to
vision.
our definition, to our values, to our priorities. You have the freedom to imagine what belonging looks like under this priority. You
Right.
have the freedom to create employee resource groups that fit into this vision. And that's where then good leadership comes in.
Right. And just knowing that heart, right? Knowing the heart of the people that you bring in, and having that trust that they're not going to take it and go and run outside of the bounds that you've provided, and then you're coming back to do damage control. So it's like having trust in the leaders that you put in place to run some of these things is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing that, as you were talking, something hit me, which might not be very important, but I was like, when we talk about, we have the leader has laid down the foundation and now gives them the autonomy to go work. The leader also have to be a little bit careful not to be too heavy-handed with the power that they have been given, because these people that are going out to implement, or the directors, those that are more in the management and operation part of it, they are going to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to have grace and not be heavy-handed, because now I have the law. Now I'm going to take the law down on you for not doing it the way I wanted you to do. It's like that constant collaboration, that symbiotic relationship needs to constantly exist between the leader and the implementers and the workers, because otherwise one person makes a mistake. If that symbiotic relationship doesn't exist, and then before you even catch it, a lot of damage has been done, and you at that point start bringing down the punishment instead of, okay, let's work together, let's make sure this thing is going smoothly. There was a mistake here, how do we quickly fix the mistake, how do we quickly redirect, how do we quickly innovate this idea that we had? Because a strategy is a strategy until you start implementing it.
Absolutely.
Something completely different. So
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
no, I'm just going to say that's exactly right. And what that requires is the ability to pause and to go, what's the actual impact of this mistake? So some things are like, it was a typo in an email, we can all figure it out. Another is, oh, you issued a statement on behalf of our institution. That's a little bit, right? Like
Damage control.
there are levels. There are levels to the mistakes, right? But it's also, I think, on the part of the leader, the responsibility in figuring out, wait a second, if someone at a lower level had the ability to make a mistake that was truly fundamentally detrimental to the existence of the organization, then you also didn't have things set up properly to begin
Properly.
with. You gave them too much, right?
Yes.
But they should not have the ability to do all of that, to ruin things in that way. It's like, and I don't mean to sound condescending or infantilizing, but it's like when you're working with kids and you're like, I have a godchild and I like to bake with them, and when they were younger, and it's like, well, no, I never gave them the responsibility of like doing the thing that was going to burn down the kitchen.
The house.
We're making dinner together. You're not turning on the stove. You're not pouring in the oil, right? Like you're pouring the rice into the little measurer for us to wash it.
Yes.
If you spill some rice on the floor, then we're like, okay, well, let's talk about how to position it and get the broom. But it's not a big deal.
Yes.
I'm not going to give you the responsibility that could ultimately burn down the kitchen.
Right.
Right?
That is an excellent description. That's an excellent way to look at it. Yes.
And I think this goes back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, what can be hard for some leaders who are not clear on what it means for them to really be committed to this idea of inclusion and belonging and equity, is that because they don't understand where responsibility should be apportioned, because they don't understand what things can look like, they then give the 7-year-old the matches to light the gas stove. Mm-hmm. And then they're mad when everything goes up. And the 7-year-old can be enthusiastic and really want to cook and like, let's get involved, but it cannot be their responsibility to set your full plan and to be the spokesperson for your organization. And every time someone comes in with a discrimination complaint, you're sending them out front. That cannot be their role.
Yeah.
Just because you're not fully comfortable doing it, that can't be their role. Yeah. It's going to go up. Anyone with sense is looking and going, that's a ticking time. Like that. Yes. This is about to be bad. That 7-year-old is playing with matches. This is about to be bad.
Exactly.
And so that's a leadership translation here, is if you're serious about diversity, then you also know you wouldn't give someone who just joined your organization fresh out of college a year ago all of your books to run all of the financials and all of the checks. You wouldn't do it there. So why are you doing it on your work around diversity?
Right. And that is a really key point, because it's like most companies will hire 1 or 2 people and then just dump everything down on them and then expect them to fix it all and be the face and be the spokesperson and be the person that everybody complains to, and the person that addresses everybody's issue on this topic. That's not enough. Like there has to be those layers. It has to be structured equally as you structure every other department in the business. You have to structure it so that the power is divided, the workload is divided. One person is not the strategist. The same person is the implementer. The same person is the counselor. The same person. It's too much. You burn the people out and then they walk out, because now they'll be like, I need more people. The need is heavy. I need more people. And you're not giving it to them. And then it becomes an issue.
But that's also shows whether or not you have commitment.
Right.
Right. Again, it becomes an institutional issue.
Yes.
If you're setting up a new department, for your other departments, do you start with a staff of 3, 5, 7, whatever it may be? Mm-hmm. Well, then why if you say it's so important to you, why do you only have one person?
Right.
Why is their budget 1/10 of the other budgets, right? Like these become the things, these are, the students, we talk about the different data points that you use to figure out where priorities are and the steps that are actually needed. These are those data points that will tell you that. So I encourage people who are thinking about whether it's a lateral move or entering into work in the DEI space, like you were told you have to figure out, is the company a good fit for you, that you said, a prior guest said. Those are the types of things you can look at. You can ask those questions. What does the staffing look like here? Right. What does budget support look like here? What does rollout look like here? Mm-hmm. Where do we go to if there are issues? Do we have access to this type of manpower? What are your expectations of us?
With me.
What are your metrics for success? You know what your metrics are in a higher ed. You know what success looks like for admissions. You know what success looks like for academic advising. You know what success looks like for career services, right? Like we know what we're looking for in these. What does success look like for your diversity office? If you can't start to say, here's what it means for us to be successful, then I question whether you're really committed to it.
Yeah, and that's why there's a lot of experts like you available to help. You know, so there's plenty of people who are really committed. There's plenty of people that are willing to help them. I was telling a friend last time who kept saying, my church needs this, my church needs this, my church needs what you're saying. And I said to them, do your leaders need what I'm saying? Because it doesn't do me any good to go waste hours at your church. It just doesn't. If your leaders really care about this and they're committed to change, then we can sit down and have the conversation and then look at how to define it so it works for your church. But I'm not going to get excited. I'm not going to run to your church now and expect your leaders to hire me to do a job that they really don't want to do. It's a waste of their time. It is a waste of my time.
Absolutely.
And on that point, the church is the toughest one.
I agree.
Have you like reflected, theorized when it comes to the church? Because it's like we have Black churches and we love our Black churches, and it's just like all us, and then we have white churches and we have Mexican churches. Have you just reflected on like DEIB and the church in general?
So the trip I mentioned earlier, our Montgomery trip, part of what we do there, it's our Justice and Faith spring break trip. And we lead students through, and part of it is for them to wrestle with their faith. And most are Christian, not all, but to wrestle with their faith and the role of particularly Christianity in injustice and justice movements in the United States. So if you go to that museum, which I recommend everybody to do, and you need to leave yourself several hours to get through it and everything. But if you go, you see pretty clearly the roles that Christianity played for people in perpetuating oppression and injustice, and the ways that Christianity fueled people in fighting oppression and injustice. And so the first thing, as I think about it, and I'll be honest, I have had probably in the last 3 to 4 years my own crises of faith, because like I'm sure I suspect you from some things you've said, and perhaps some of your listeners, I wrestled with this feeling of this institution, not God, not Jesus, but this institution that I love so much. And I grew up in a church that was predominantly Black, in fact, West Indian. But, for much of my adult life, especially living in the US, I've gone to churches that were heavily multicultural, but primarily white-led. And primarily, white male speakers were deified, theologians were lifted up, and so on. And in the wake, even I would say starting with the tragic death of Trayvon Martin forward. So not just 2020, going back to 2011, 2012, forward, I wrestled with this feeling that this institution that I cared so much about and I put so much trust in and I devoted so much time to did not seem to care about me or my people in the same kind of way. That it could be vocal about other issues and not vocal about the issues that impacted my life and the lives of people like me. And that was a very difficult place for me to be in. In the year, probably June 2020 through June 2021. I mean, yes, the pandemic, but for other reasons, it was very difficult for me to find church community and church home, because at the same time that as an individual, you're saying you care about me, structurally, you don't care about me, right? And again, moving past the individual interpersonal, you care about me, you're praying for me, you love me. but you don't love me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
wrestling with this, like, if I have a young Black child and my child is killed, is the first thing you're looking for excuses for the person who killed them? Or is it compassion for me and my family?
Yes.
Well, you only start to care when it happens to me because you've decided that I'm good. But I had to prove that to you as an institution. And that was a very difficult place for me. So yeah, in doing DEI work outside of the church, I think a lot about what it looks like inside the church. What does it look like? What does it mean if the sort of heroes of faith that we hold up are all viewed in one way?
Yeah.
What does it mean if we portray God only as stern father who happens to be white, that is very far removed unless you do something wrong?
Yeah.
Right? What does it mean if the only people that Jesus walked with and healed and cared for were also white people, except for the one who happened to carry his cross? Right? Like, what are these things? Yeah. How is my faith perpetuating biases against me?
Yes.
What does it mean for you to so confidently preach about the mark of Cain and how it creates subjugation and not see that you're saying that I am therefore inherently created to be subjugated to you?
Yeah.
And if that's your theology, how can I find myself in it?
Yes.
And I say that it is truly a testament to the power and the grace of God. And again, I'll lift up that this is Easter weekend.
Yes.
That so many people of color, and particularly Black people, love him so much.
Yeah.
If people ever, I have people, how can you believe in God? And I'm like, because I can believe in God. Because there are a lot of people where it's like, based on all of this, perhaps I should not. Perhaps others should not. So this has to be something more than something man-made, or else I could not believe in it, you know?
Right.
But then I am led back to the work of some great theologians, right? Womanist theologians like Dr. Renita Weems, and older theologians like James Cone and Cornel West. And I think about people like Aubrey Hendricks, and I think about even, modern day people who are writing now and living now and carrying us through. And I think about what it looks like to read myself into scripture.
Right.
And so on that trip, we even talked about the role of the church and the role of the Black church in justice movements and in interpreting scripture in a way that is empowering to people here on earth.
Yeah.
And my greatest fear, truly, for my counterparts who are deeply devoted Christians and white, is that they will not experience the liberation that comes with reading the Bible with a justice lens.
Mindset.
Because there is liberation that comes with accepting that God loves you and that God does not just want you to have justice and glory in the life to come, but in the life here now. Yeah. There is so much that comes from that. There is so much grace that you can give to others, and this may be controversial, where you can say, I believe that every life created in the womb is sacred and meant to be born, and that once it's born, it deserves health care, and that once it's born, it deserves food, and that once it's born, it deserves an education, and that once it's born, it should be able to move through the world without fear of being unjustly murdered or taken or killed, and that once it's born, it should have clean water, and once it's born, it should have grace and love regardless of how it identifies, so that it's pointed back to Christ. And if I can't guarantee that, how dare I tell someone they have to have that child if I'm not willing to walk with them after they have that child?
Yes.
I am radically pro-life, but I have to be pro-life in a way that recognizes the liberation of all people.
Yes.
And that I have to care about that life after that life is born.
Yes.
You know? And if I can't care about that life after it's born, I don't get to tell you to have it.
Word. And that's something that
I hear too much. It might be controversial, but here's where I sit,
It is. That's why we wrestle. That's why we wrestle. And if anybody have a contrary view, they're welcome to come to the show and have a conversation with us. It's this is why we wrestle. This is why we have very frank, honest conversations. I don't bring people on the show I cannot have authentic conversations with.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care what spectrum they are on. I want authenticity from my guest. And when George Floyd died, and somebody close to me basically said, "Oh, you guys are aborting babies," and da 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 da. I was like, one life, you can't say that. And then my question to them was, if you care so much about aborted babies, how many single mothers are you helping?
Mm-hmm.
How many kids have you brought in so that the single mother that got pregnant have something to have a life, can have a place to leave the baby with, go to work, go back to school, and things like that? How many? You
Yeah.
care so much. You care so much that it's okay to kill a man on the street. You care so much. But how many are you helping? And the answer is zero. So what right do you have to talk about this person's choices when you have deliberately made the choice not to help somebody else get on their feet once they have that baby?
Yeah. And, I will say that the structural part to that as well is I believe, and this is why I figure I get in trouble from everybody. But, people say, well, the government shouldn't be doing that. And I say, you're right. Biblically, Old Testament to New, we as believers should be doing that.
Yes.
No one in my church should need welfare, because we as a church should be having everything in common so that no one has need.
Yes.
No one in my church should need health care, because we as a church should have doctors that we can provide that support. No one in my church should have to go to the courts, because we as a church should be, like it says in Romans, being able to work out our disagreements among each other.
Yes.
However, where we as a church have failed, the Old Testament does provide for government to step in and provide that support.
Amen.
And if we want to say that that support shouldn't be given by the government, then we need to be providing it.
That is the word.
And so we as a church then need to step up, and we need to do it in a way that recognizes, to your point earlier, the differences among us.
Mm-hmm.
We need to care. We cannot just replicate. And I feel such pain for our indigenous brothers and sisters who experience so much harm at the hands of people professing Christ, who stamped out their culture, subjugated their people, took their land, forced them into situations that are not helpful. We can't replicate that.
No.
We can't say, okay, the church is providing it, and then we box people in and take from them, right? No, we have to be doing this in a way that would be the model of Christ.
Right.
But we should be doing it. So then I say, well, what's your reaction when someone comes into your church pregnant? Do you shame them? Do you harm them? Do you throw them a baby shower? Do you offer to wrap around them? Do you tell the young girls, don't talk to that person because they obviously don't know how to do it right? Do you tell your young men, that one's never going to be worth marrying? Why are you talking to her? Why do you date her? Because depending on the actions that you're taking, you're communicating whether or not you actually are living out what you believe, which is that child was placed by God here for a reason. Do you shame that child when they're born?
Before they're born.
Before they're even born, do you stigmatize that child? Because if you do that, then you don't get to say that you're pro-life.
Yes.
You're not pro that child's life. Yeah. And how are you? No woman gets pregnant by herself. So how are you treating the young men in your church? Yes, we should have standards for holiness and purity. Do you require that from the young men in your church?
Young men. Yeah.
Or do you wink at them and then tell the girls to be better?
Yeah.
Because that too is sending a signal. Do you hold them accountable for the children that they're having? Do you require them to get some jobs and pay for things? Or do you tell them, boys will be boys, and let the women go along? How do you handle abuse? How do you handle mistreatment? How do you handle harassment? Are you raising people to be honorable and caring and compassionate and justice-minded? If you're not doing any of that, we don't, unfortunately, Black, white, Hispanic, we don't have institutionally a lot of room to talk
on
a lot of these issues.
Yeah. And that's why I do the podcast.
And that's why, God bless you, truly, Dr. Akumbu, for standing in the gap
Yeah.
here, because we need to be more in line with what it looks like to be God's representatives here
Right.
on earth
Right.
for the whole South, which includes our ethnicities and our different languages and all of that, and our genders and all of our experiences, right? We need to be better representatives of that
Right.
here on earth before we can start telling people what they need to do.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
I got up. I went on my.
No, I love it. I love it. It's like the juicy stuff come when you're just having conversation, right? Like if we had prepared for this, some of these things we would never dig in. But when we just serve and we just talk and we explore these things, then new things come up and then we discuss it. So, one thing that you've said that has really piqued my interest is maybe for our next section, we should talk about just the church and their role in the civil rights movements and in justice movements and all of that. Maybe if you can just bring us a lot of stuff and let's just dig in and talk about all these leaders and how they made a difference, even the negatives. Sometimes it's important to know the negatives so that we know how far we've come. So maybe for our next session we could do that.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
This was wonderful. I appreciate you, and I just hope that I know the audience will be blessed, and I just look forward to the next one. Thank you so much I know we went a little bit over, but thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you again for having me, Dr. Akumbu. It's such an honor to be able to share space and conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I value it so much. Thank you. All right. Bye. This was such an amazing time with Dean Richards. Doesn't she just go deep and make you want to talk to her all day? If you have any questions, you have any topics that you would like us to discuss, please leave us a comment in these videos, and we will be able to loop it in to our next conversation. Help us bring you topics that are enriching, that are challenging, topics that allows us to wrestle with you on the things that you're going through, which you might not be willing to come on the show and talk about. But if you want to come on the show and talk about anything, please share it with me, and I will see if it aligns. If it does, we will have that conversation. We appreciate you. We appreciate the time you take to listen to these conversations. Until next time, Jambo.